go.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Amazing.
So
Okay.
sorry.
Okay. Can you hear us?
I've been on forever. I knew we should have done an audio check, but
Is there
anyway.
turn up the volume?
Good morning, good day.
Yes, good morning. Is there a way to turn up the volume on the Zoom? I don't know if that's a possibility. I guess that's a Bill question. Hopefully, maybe not. Okay. Okay, Michelle, we've got your slides up. I'm not sure if you're able to see them, but if you'd like, you can just say next slide and then I can advance them. At least I think I can advance them on here. Is that correct? Maybe. Let me see if I can. Yes, I can advance them. Okay, so if you'd like to go ahead and get started, and I can advance your slides whenever you say next.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me this morning. I'm really excited about this workshop. I'm sorry I can't be with you. This is a topic that is really near and dear to my heart because I've been working technology for a very long time, and I know all of the unique facilities and hard work that goes into testing and making sure we have high fidelity environments. And so I really applaud the effort to put this workshop together because I think that, as has been said this morning, this is a topic that has not received enough attention and thought yet. So this is great timing. So next slide, please. I'm going to give you kind of the big picture, the way big picture perspective. Many of you have probably seen this before, but I wanted to really create the picture for you about how the work you're doing and the development of proving grounds really fits into NASA's overarching strategy and the blueprint that we are putting together for exploration with our international partners and our industry and academic partners as well. So many of you have been part of this community for quite a while, and you are the ones who are helping us achieve these objectives. So let me start with the big Moon to Mars blueprint objectives. Our overarching goal came from our Deputy Administrator, Pam Melroy, about a little less than 2 years ago. She charged her chief architect with putting together this blueprint. And really what we want to do here is move towards sustained human presence and exploration throughout the solar system. So notice that this doesn't say go to the moon, doesn't say go to Mars. It says sustain human presence and exploration throughout the solar system. So we have a very lofty goal statement here. Next slide. Next, you get into how are we going to do this? And the chief architect and Deputy Administrator Melroy and the federated board within NASA created really the why first, which is what we call the 3 pillars of why you want to explore in the first place. And those include for science, for inspiration, inspiring your community and your constituents, and also national posture. So given those 3 pillars of the why, that forms your value proposition. And then you can move into the what and the how. And so we've spent a lot of time over the past year and a half or so on the what. And we're going to talk about that. We call that architecting from the right, and really making sure you have strong objectives that can stand the test of time, and then do your systems engineering breakdown from that. One of my favorite things about this picture in particular is the little fuel tank off on the bottom right-hand side, and that represents the technologies and how, as those are developed from the dotted shapes that are just early stage concepts up to the more solid shapes within that fuel tank, and the pipeline that gets them into our actual vehicles, that's where we work, right, as the technology community. And so making sure that this whole structure is in place really enables us to have connection points and mission pull, as well as opportunities for our technologies to be inserted. So after you define that, what and the objectives that we'll talk about in a minute, then we leave the how to the programs. So that's the definition of the elements. Those are, defined and managed and put out on contract or contributed from our partners. And then those get implemented, managed, and receive funding to be implemented. So this is kind of the overall idea of what we've been putting together at the top level. Next slide. So we have some things called methodology principles. There are 5 of them. I just talked about the blueprint all the way to the right. And then we defined objectives along 4 different tracks. Science, which is very broad and all-encompassing, I'd say. We have many objectives in that area. Next, infrastructure, which is largely what this community is interested in, but also transportation and habitation of the crew and their elements, and then the operations and what the crew is actually going to do when they're on the surface. So as we defined all these, we want to take this objective-based approach, and I'll talk about those in a little bit more detail. And again, we're architecting from the right, from those pillars of 3 pillars of value proposition, and from this blueprint with our long-term goal in mind. Next slide. So filling in from the right, you'll see all those objectives depicted. There are now 63 objectives, and they really give us, again, a constancy of purpose. And they're written broadly enough so that they will stand the test of time across multiple administrations and changes in government and other aspects of our world. They create unity of purpose. So we all know that we're marching to the same set of objectives. And then we really need to rely upon and strengthen communication and engagement. And so that's with the whole world. I'll show you some examples of that, but getting partners and making sure that we're all aligned and that we do have this constancy and unity of purpose is very key. It's also key to showing our stakeholders that we are serious and we have some long-term goals. We have a strategy, and there is a logical, decomposition of those objectives and a logical progression into the actual exploration architectures that we want to implement. So next slide. So we started with a set of 50 objectives back about last April of 2022. And we did a lot of stakeholder outreach. So this goes to the enhanced communication. Many of you are probably aware of this and have participated in it. We put out a NASA at Work campaign for internal to the agency. We got close to 200 inputs there. We had a workshop with our international partners in last summer with 16 space agencies, and we had a workshop with industry and academia last summer as well. I'll say that this summer, I'll show you a little bit more about the process as it's progressed since last summer. But we have done engagement recently with the same communities, international and U.S. academia and industry, There's ongoing input that's sought and town halls that have happened within the agency as well. So we're continuing on this this campaign of seeking feedback and communicating with our partners and stakeholders. So these 5,000 inputs, if you go to the next slide, resulted in, as I said, the 63 objectives. So we did not preserve our number of objectives, but that's okay. I think we have a much more robust set now. And as we rewrote them, we were finding ourselves saying the same things over and over again, like, you know, leverage international and industry collaboration, return the crew safely, have interoperability, develop the space economy. And so we pulled those out ultimately as recurring tenets and really ideas and common themes across all the objectives that are really important and foundational to our whole approach. So I would remind everyone that, you know, if you don't see a word that you expected to see in a particular goal or objective, it might be because it's so important and so overarching that we've put it into the recurring tenets. We also published a glossary with those, and there's a QR code at the end that has a summary, is a summary document of the updated, latest, and greatest information. Next slide. So for the Space Technology Mission Directorate perspective, we were responsible for putting forth the lunar infrastructure and the Mars infrastructure goal and objectives. So I've included the lunar ones here for this audience. And I think we had only 6 lunar infrastructure objectives going into last summer. And then when we came out of all the feedback, we broke these apart into 9. And the first 3 are really those core, what we call utilities, I guess, that you're going to need to conduct exploration on the lunar surface. So they're power, communications, and position, navigation, and timing. So those are really fundamental, probably, very early in the timeline. The next 3, advanced manufacturing, autonomous construction, precision landing, local, regional, and global surface transportation and mobility. Those are kind of, okay, you can survive on the surface and you can communicate. Now, you're really into operations now. What do you want to be able to do? What do you need to be able to do? And then the next 2 are really stepping beyond that very first, I'd say, exploration, the very first missions, and starting to look at the longer term and utilizing in situ resources, industrial, and scaling those up to the industrial scale to support continuous presence and a robust economy. And then looking at things like depots, construction and manufacturing, using those in situ resources and everything that goes with that to really allow us to live on the surface for long periods of time. And then the final one, I'll admit, is kind of misplaced. We added it out of last summer's feedback, is really kind of goes up into maybe between number 3 and 4 somewhere. Developing environmental modeling, situational awareness, and early warning. And we kept hearing this theme, particularly with our international partners, of resiliency. And, I totally agree that we want a resilient architecture, not a brittle architecture. And so functions like LI9 help us to enable that. So, one other reason that we grew in the number of objectives is that we really, when we sat down and looked at them again after the feedback, we wanted to make sure that we could measure the outcome for each one independently So in our previous version, we had, kind of the first three grouped into one bullet. And we think that these will be achieved perhaps on different timescales and to different degrees. And so measuring our success really dictated that we break these out so that we can individually track the progress and the attainment of each of these objectives as we go. Next slide. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about STMD in particular, Space Technology Mission Directorate. Now that you have that big picture and the knowledge that we have contributed, the infrastructure objectives, and also had a hand in modifying the other objectives and making sure that, we agree with those and that all the functions that we see are adequately covered. So what's our role in all of this now? So our vision is to transform NASA missions and ensure American leadership in the space economy through rapidly developing, demonstrating, and transferring technology. And we're driven by the NASA mission, of course, in particular, Goal 3.1, innovate and advance transformational space technologies. And, the more I see, the more I believe, and I knew this, but, it becomes more evident every day, and that is that technology is going to make all of these objectives possible. There are very few of those objectives that we can meet today. And so I'm really, excited about the role that our organization and our community is going to play in satisfying the objectives. Next slide. So we're building upon a technology framework, which I'll show you in a second. You're probably mostly familiar with that, but we've organized around thrust areas, and that points us towards achieving particular strategic outcomes. So we have actually three overarching outcomes called LEAD, which are, we're trying to advance U.S. space technology, innovation, and competitiveness in the world context. Not to say we don't want to partner with others, we do, that's absolutely necessary, but we are an organization that is driven towards making sure we have a strong U.S. space economy. Next is to, encourage that technology-driven economic growth. So creating markets, and I know at some point, probably today, someone will say we're going to, tack a day onto the fall LSIC workshop about lunar markets and transition to commercial to meet those, particularly those last couple objectives, LI7 and LI8. How do we actually create markets that are sustainable so that we can really let this economy take off? And that's a real challenge that we have, and we want to get broad feedback on that. And then the last one, which is, exciting to me as well, is inspire and develop that powerful U.S. aerospace technology community. And, I don't have time today, but we have, so many programs, particularly in our early stage portfolio, that really reach across so many different communities, academic, crowdsourcing, all the way down to high school level, small businesses, et cetera. It's really, really great to see how broad of a sector of people can actually contribute. And you see that word inspire there, which really is in parallel with those three pillars of our overarching goal that I talked about at the beginning. Next slide. So here's our strategic technology framework, and I apologize, the font is really small, which indicates we're trying to do a lot of things. So you see that lead outcome over on the left, which is kind of one of those, it's almost like our recurring tenants within STMD. And then we have our four thrusts: go, land, live, and explore. And I think those are really a really catchy moniker to, be able to recall, what are we doing? What are we trying to enable? Go, land, live, and explore. I won't read all of our outcomes there, but each of those outcomes is very much parallel to the objectives. And then over on the right-hand side, we have our capability areas. And we actually have a person, a belly button, who oversees each of those capability areas. It's a principal technologist or system capability lead within the agency, and they're really responsible for knowing what the current state of the art is, identifying gaps that we need to close to achieve our objectives, working across the community, internal and external to the agency, and really guiding and advocating for our investments and putting together the strategy for the technology development. So I'll show you in a second. They have some strategies, but this isn't just words on a page. There are people working, all day, every day to make sure that we're defining and advancing these areas in the best way we can. I'll also mention down in the Explore thrust, a lot of the outcomes are very cross-cutting. So you might not see the word lunar anywhere there, but these are really transformational technologies that could apply in many, many different missions and applications. So it's a really exciting emerging area. Next slide. So I mentioned those, the folks are PTs, principal technologists and system capability leads. For each of those 17 capabilities, they've put together a package, what we call the Envisioned Future Priority. So Envisioned Future is really the first page of this PowerPoint package. And it shows kind of where we are today and what we're trying to do in the future, aligned with these objectives, not only Moon to Mars, but, STMD serves the entire agency. So we are, we're working on the Dragonfly mission to Titan. We're working on heliophysics missions and large telescopes. And at first glance, those may not seem like they fit into the objectives, but remember back to that overarching goal of sustained human presence and exploration throughout the solar system. So all those missions and all the knowledge we're gaining is really setting us up for that really audacious future. So these packages, again, give the understanding of the state of the art, where we're going, and then the near-term high priorities. Which gaps do we need to fill first? How will we go about doing that? And we are putting more meat into these plans every day, every month. You'll see the folks at Ascend again this year. We're not going to have roundtables, but we will have panel discussions so that you can interact with our principal technologists and system capability leads. We also have a pervasive link on the page you see there, and there's a QR code at the end of the presentation. But at our TechPort framework page, where you can find all these envisioned futures and a video to go with pretty much everyone. And if you just want to get a 10-minute view of what's going on or what we're thinking, there's a pervasive link to provide feedback. So I think it's a big blue button. I invite you to do that because these are constantly evolving products. They're not stagnant whatsoever. So please take a look at these if you haven't. We've just gone through another round of updates based on feedback within the agency. So we're excited to see what you all think as well. Next slide. So how does this, STMD framework and these technologists, advocating for things fit together with the Moon to Mars objectives and, human lunar return and Artemis and everything we know is in execution right now. So this is kind of what the future looks like in terms of the architecture segments. As I mentioned, human lunar return on the left, that's really the initial capabilities to reestablish human presence, right, to get us back to the moon. So I would say that's through Artemis 3 to 5-ish. And then we have a foundational exploration segment after that, which expands our capabilities. So, you know, we'll put down a habitat. We'll likely take delivery of some contributions from our international partners. We'll start to, you know, put some more utilities on the surface and start looking at Mars forward analogs. Because remember, our goal in this architecture is to really get to the initial humans to Mars implementation. So, and then after foundational, we go into the sustained lunar evolution segment, which is really, you know, just think of the city growing and the suburbs starting to come into being and starting to move around the lunar globe. Global utilization, economic opportunity, a steady cadence of people, and really sustained presence 24/7, 365. So those are the segments, and as you might imagine, we are, you know, I didn't explain it very well on the one of the previous charts, but, you know, we're architecting from the right, understanding our long-term objectives and what we want to do with humans on Mars, and eventually at the moon. And we've got human lunar return, you know, Artemis 1, great success. Artemis 2 coming up quickly, and, you know, really everybody looking towards Artemis 3 and getting boots on the moon again. You know, what happens in the middle? These two things kind of clash, right? And that's what we're really in the crux of right now, is figuring out how we influence those elements that are being defined and now in development, and influence them with these new objectives that we have since you know, those happened after we began human lunar return. So there are lots of folks working hard to update the architectures incrementally, and STMD has a role in that. I'll show you in a second. But main point of this chart is to show you that the infrastructure objectives will really come into play in foundational exploration and sustained lunar evolution, which is great because that means our technologies are really almost ready to very much influence those segments. The technologies largely for human lunar return were, you know, developed a decade ago. So now we're right in the best timing to influence these next few segments. Next slide, please. Okay, so as we're, you know, architecting from the right in a tactical sense, what are we doing? So the objectives came out. We have been decomposing them into characteristics and needs, and then functions and use cases. And these are the actual sub-architectures that will fit into the segments that I just showed you on the previous chart. So, you know, for instance, if I take LI-7, which is about in situ resource utilization, and I decompose that into, you know, what does that look like? What does it really mean to me to achieve LI-7? Well, it means that I must be able to process, store, and transfer in situ resource utilized components, products. And so then we've defined that in that yellow box of characteristics. That's what that looks like to us. Then how does that flow back into functions? You know, how much of a commodity do I need to produce? How long do I have to store it? And then that gets broken down into a use case. And we say, okay, we're going to have the goal. We want an element that produces, you know, 500 kilograms of oxygen and stores it for 3 months. And then we have something tangible that we can then go and analyze, how long is that going to take? What sort of equipment will that take? How much, power, mass, volume, et cetera. So that's kind of the process that we're going through right now. Really the objectives give us those hooks into being able to result in elements in the architecture. Next slide. So this is kind of the overall process of really defining those segments and the architectures and sub-architectures that I've talked about. So if you we're in something called a strategic analysis cycle, or SAC. This is SAC 23 right now, which means that's where all the campaign and architecture development is going on. Once an element is kind of defined or identified by the architecture team, it gets handed over to a formulation team. There's obviously lots of modeling and simulation going on, and in some cases, even rapid prototyping and human-in-the-loop testing for those elements that are a little bit more mature. If you kind of back that up to say, how does this strategic analysis cycle fit into this Moon to Mars objective to architecture process, that's kind of shown at the bottom. So we have our objectives. We have in February, we completed our first architecture concept review, ACR, and out of that was published an architecture definition document. And I hope you all have seen that. It's about a 150-page document that really shows, where we are at the present time, particularly with the lunar architecture, and it also touches on Mars. There will be, there's work going on now to get to the next architecture concept review, which will be in November. From now on, they'll be held annually in November to align with our budgetary cycles. After that ACR in the green box, there'll be a confirmation from all the leaders within the agency that yes, this is the architecture that we want to go forward with. And then we go into the next strategic analysis cycle, leading to the next November. So STMD is involved in, not only the top-down architecture, sub-architecture definition based on the characteristics and needs and functions and use cases, but we're also participating in the strategic analysis cycles and helping to make sure technologies are considered in the trade space, what their influence could be on the architecture going forward, and starting to really build those relationships with the working teams that will help us get our technologies infused into the architectures. The next slide. So with that, I hope that I've shown you how the whole process is working to define the lunar architecture going forward, how technology is influencing that based on the objectives that we've established and documented. If you have not read the Moon to Mars strategy and objectives document, the QR code for that is on the left. It's about a 25-page document that kind of that explains all of that sort of very high-level context that I talked about. And then on the right, you can see the TechPort link for our Envisioned future priorities and the feedback link that is there. So with that, I would like to wish you all a very productive and successful workshop. We're really looking forward to the results so that we can really work the proving grounds into the timelines that are going to be so important to achieving these objectives. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Michelle. Yeah, let's thank our speaker. I don't know if you're able to hear the room, but we were all clapping. All right, we've got a few minutes now for questions. So as a reminder, folks can use the Slido. I see that there's already a good amount of questions coming in there. But we also have in-person microphones. There's one along each of these aisles here, kind of like halfway up. If you'd like to answer a question, we'll try to prioritize Slido just because that's the only way virtual folks can ask questions. But if you are in person and you'd like to ask a question, you can feel free to use those microphones. But Danielle is going to be our Slido guru. So if you want to hit up some of the questions on Slido, go for it. I think so far I don't see anyone lined up at the microphone, so we could probably hit a few there. So.
Yeah, so hi Michelle, thank you, wonderful presentation. There are a couple questions online. One of the biggest ones is, how might a lunar proving grounds on the moon itself intersect with Artemis missions and other Moon to Mars activities?
That's a good question. So on, a test bed on the lunar surface, I think, there's a couple things that are already planned into the architecture, such as, I didn't talk about it here, but utilization payloads. And so each Artemis landing, with now 2 contracts, yay, increased cadence, each one has a payload and resource allocation, resource in terms of like power and communication, for what we call utilization payloads. And those could be technology development or scientific payloads that can be delivered to the surface with the Artemis landers. So, I could see between those payloads that are hitching a ride on Artemis and, the CLIPS landers and what they've delivered as they move into the ability to survive the lunar night, you could definitely see, an aggregation of assets that could be used together in some sort of testing regime that, before they are put into perhaps primetime use in a mission critical function. So I haven't heard the term proving ground used in the context of the architecture, but I think the vehicle to put all the pieces in place is there or will be there.
Thank you. The next question online, thanks, is, can you talk about how STMD is working on the architecture side to improve infusion into other mission directorates?
Sure. Thanks for that question. That's been my primary role as the acting chief architect over the past year or so, is to really make that connection with the Moon to Mars architecture. So we have started a more regular cadence of interaction at various levels, such as, Walt England, our deputy AA for programs, meets regularly with ESDMD, Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate heads, so that we stay coordinated. If Artemis finds a gap in some function, we are, well coordinated to survey our investment portfolio and connect the right folks to perhaps fill that gap. So that's one, very specific example. In addition, we are connecting all of our principal technologists and system capability leads to those SAC tasks that are going on. So actually next week we have a couple-day review where we're going to talk about the output of all those tasks leading into ACR. And that will give us a heads up about, okay, wow, the analysis team is finding that, they need power that has these particular specifications. And then we can coordinate on the STMD side, making folks more aware of our investments, starting to talk to industry about technology transfer paths, et cetera. So that's at the working level. And then as I described, we are actively participating in decomposing the objectives into these characteristics and needs and functions and use cases that really gets them on the list for the next analysis cycle. So that's kind of our top down, and then we're working sort of bottoms up in addition to that. So I'm really hopeful that this is really going to result in a lot more awareness of our technologies and mission pull being identified, and then actual infusions.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. We've got a question in the room at the center mic. Yeah, go for it. Make sure the microphone's on.
Hey, Michelle. Chris Myers from CZ Mastro. One comment, one question. First comment. It's too bad about the roundtables at Ascend last year. We found to be great value for our company. It's too bad you're not doing them again this year. Take any recommendation, I'd say do it again. The question is, I know there are a lot of lunar demonstrations that were proposed as part of Tipping Point. I know it's behind, but are there any updates on the awarding of Tipping Point?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We are working daily with our legal and procurement teams to try to get those awards to the point of announcement. So we apologize, and thanks everybody for your patience. There's a heavy workload, and they're working through it as quickly as they can. And I hear you. Thank you for the comment on the roundtables. We're hoping that the panels will be effective as well, and we're encouraging everyone to stick around and make themselves available again. So hopefully you'll get some interaction, and we'll see how it goes, and maybe we'll go back to the old way. But thank you for that.
All right, thanks, Michelle. Let's do one more question in the room, and then I think we'll have to move on to our next session, if that's all right. Yeah, so go ahead.
Well, I'm Daniel Colt from the Colorado School of Mines, and I'm an Air Force officer in my day job. And so I keyed in to your slide that talked about national posture and unity of purpose and engagement. And I'm curious if this doesn't already exist, is there a unified effort to bring the DoD into participation in your goals, specifically through maybe officers going through professional military education or seeking advanced degrees through AFIT? I think there's a couple models that we might be able to copy to get a unified effort for kind of part-time participation by the DoD to help you towards these goals, because I think it meets the national interest overall.
Yes, really good point. Thank you. I failed to mention that we are also this summer going to be holding a couple workshops, a seminar and a workshop with other government agencies. And this will kind of dovetail nicely with the implementation of our national cislunar strategy that involves other government agencies as well. So very good point. And I think we'll see that engagement increase in the future.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're just about out of time for Q&A. There are quite a few more questions on the Slido, and so I think what we'll do is we'll gather those up, send them to Michelle, if that's all right with you, Michelle, and maybe request a couple answers that we can kind of send back out to the community, just so that everyone gets their questions answered. But let's go ahead and thank our speaker again. Thank you so much, Michelle, for tuning in and giving us the keynote.
Thank you.